I don't like to speak behind a podium or a platform. I like to be down with the group, so I'm going to do away with that, and I'll probably move around a lot in here. She gave me a wireless mic, so I don't have to stand there. So let's talk about the fire of 43. Rachel didn't mention it in the introduction, but I think most of you know I'm a surveyor, so we have to start with a lot of maps. And this is the town center, as you would see it today. Right dead center is the church, and we're in the town hall right over here. And of course you got the library and the parish house and the meeting room and the Sam Lake house and the store. And there's a building here, I'm going to refer to it today as the Sabin Girton house. Sabin's barn, which is no longer there, and Lois Scribner's bed and breakfast is over here. Back in the early 1990s, I was asked to do some surveying here in the center of town. And the property lines here in the center of town are all pretty fluid. If you think about it, you come in here, you park in here, you go to the church, you go to the gazebo, you go to the town hall, you go in the store, maybe you go pick your kids up at daycare. All of those are different businesses, different entities owned by different people, but yet we kind of just all park where we want to park, even though maybe you're not on property that's appropriate for whatever business you're there for today. And similarly, at one time, the Sam Lake House had a well, and that well was supplying water for most of these buildings. So things like easements and parking and responsibility and things like that are all pretty fluid in there, and some of that dates back a long time, back to before there was a separation of church and state, when the meeting house was used mutually. So some of it goes back a long way. Some of it doesn't go back quite so far. And for the most part, it works. I mean, it probably isn't legal, it probably isn't right. If you're the town, you probably shouldn't be spending town resources on things like mowing lawns for private property or plowing snow for things that aren't town municipal property. But if you're mowing the grass here, and you're mowing the grass here, and you're mowing the grass here, and you're mowing it here and here, you know, you're going to stop where, how, and the same with plowing snow. Some of these are town facilities that require town snow plowing. Some of them maybe not, but you're going to pick the plow up every time you come to a property line. So it kind of works, and most of the time it really doesn't matter, but occasionally it does. And usually that's when something happens, like a fender bender, or somebody slips on the ice and gets hurt. Or if you remember the early 1990s big dig in the center, there used to be fuel pumps at the store, and the underground fuel tanks leaked, and the plume coming out of there had to be dealt with. And it was pretty clear who owned the fuel tanks, but whose property were they on? Were they on the church property, the town property? Were they in a public way? Did they belong to the store? Were they private? So there were some issues there, and in the 1990s I started surveying some of there. So I started reading the deeds to do a lot of the surveying that was required here, and I found some really interesting, juicy, bizarre stuff. To start with, the parish house, that's on town hall property. The town hall, that's on private property. The bandstand, that's on store property. The store, that's on Sam Lake property. Sam Lake is over here, but the store is Sam Lake property. One of my favorites is right here at the flagpole, where there's a flagpole and a veterans monument. That's owned half and half. The church owns half of that, and private property owns the other half. If you go to the library is on Sam Lake property, but to get to it, you have to trespass across private property here. So everybody here who parked in this parking lot, you're probably trespassing. So when I started looking into this, it's like, wow, this is really a problem, and we're opening a can of worms here, and I'm not sure you really want to open this can of worms for the sake of some easements that seem to be working out okay anyway. Maybe we just want to keep our head down and look the other way and see where we go from there. I found out that a lot of the reasons why we have these fluid property lines and things, some of it dates back to, like I said, separation of church and state. Some of it dates back to the fact that before zoning, you could build where it kind of made sense based on grade and topography, rather than on arbitrary distances on setback lines and things. But some of it comes from the fire of 43. And during the fire of 43, everything shifted, everything changed, except the property lines. Catherine Dixon does a pretty good job in her book writing about the fire of 43. And she's got most of a chapter discussing the fire. Now, she describes it from her perspective and her memory. And you know, that's fine. That's what you would expect. She wasn't researching it to be factually dead on necessarily. She was telling the story as she remembered it and as she perceived it. And that's great. But there's a number of other people that were involved in the fire, and their memories and their perception of it are totally different than Catherine's. And some of them are quite adamant that Catherine is not necessarily correct and accurate. Some of them are a little more understanding, saying, well, that's how she remembers it, but it's not how I remember it. And some of them are pretty feisty about it. This gentleman looks feisty, but he's very harmless. Anybody know who it is? Anybody recognize this gentleman? Nobody's got it? That's Lenny Giles. His father, Gerald Giles, owned the store when it caught fire. So Lenny had a first-hand, he was actually asleep in the building when it caught fire. So his perspective on it is pretty dead on, I would say. Don't get hung up by the shotgun. He and I were doing another project totally unrelated to the fire. And for the other project, he wanted to look like Elmer Fudd. And so this is kind of a staged photo where he dressed up like Elmer Fudd and held a shotgun and dressed like that. But I had the opportunity to sit and talk with him numerous times about the fire. And what a great guy to talk to get history of Canterbury Center back in that time period. He was just a totally great guy. And if the name sounds somewhat familiar, it may be because of River Dave. River Dave, they talk about camping out on a landowner, you know, and the landowner is some distant landowner up in Vermont. Well, it's Lenny Giles. Lenny's father, Gerald Giles, loaned money on the land, took a mortgage on it, ended up owning it, passed it on to his son Lenny, and that's how come Lenny owned the land where River Dave camped out a while ago. In addition to Lenny Giles, I had an afternoon with these other gentlemen. What a fun afternoon that was. You get the three of these guys together, and what a hoot it was. I didn't anticipate what this turned into be. These guys had all gone to the one-room schoolhouses here in the town. They all knew each other when they were little. They hadn't seen each other in decades. But coincidentally, they were all coming together, and I herded them into a room and said, tell me what you remember about the fire of 43. And they gave me great stuff. The first one is Sid Noyes, and he lived out by the golf course and had at least 3 generations of family had lived out there, and they all worked for the railroad when the railroad was dominant in town. And he was clearly the ringleader in this group, the instigator, and man, you got him going. It was hard to rein him in. And of course, the next one's Lenny Giles, and as far as knowing most about the fire, well, he was right smack in the middle of it, so what a wonderful source he was. And Dave Powers, his grandmother was a Clough, and she was the last Clough to own Clough Tavern up where the Scanlons live. She was the last one up there, and he lived with her at the time period when the fire caught. So the three of them all had totally different perspectives on it, and it was great to capture all of that. And they gave me a lot of photos and a lot of information that they had. I also talked to some other people. Nobody's calling out names, but so I'm assuming you don't recognize them. That's Harry Lamprey. That's Ed Davis. And that's Willie Nelson. And Harold Sargent. And George Bovair. See family members here. And all these guys had a recollection or two or something about it, or they remembered what it looked like before the fire or after the fire. Well, you start gathering all this information, and it was just a wonderful, fun project. And there's one more person we need to mention. Now, you want to talk about somebody who's feisty and will get in your face if she thinks you got something wrong or wants you to tell it differently. I loved her. She was such a terrific lady to work with, and she gave me a lot of photos and a lot of information. And she was heavily involved kind of after the fire with the rebuild. And there was a women's fire auxiliary, and she was the president of that, and they raised money to start a fire department. So she just a great source of information. And between all these people, I really got a lot of good information on the fire. Now I want to get us orchestrated, organized, situated? Orientated. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Placed. Now this is the store, and obviously we all know where the store is, and it's easily recognizable as a building because it's got this funny dormer, and the roof runs this way, and then it turns perpendicular and runs the other way. And that makes it kind of easy to recognize in some of the old photos because those things don't change. But what does change is you often hear, or if you read certain documents, you'll hear that the fire started in the store, or you'll hear that the fire started in Giles's store. And that's not wrong, but there was more than one building in town where Giles had a store. And the fire did not start in this building, it started in a different building where he had a store. So just to make sure we're clear, if I say the fire started in the store, I'm not talking about this one. And I'm going to try and refer to this store as Halla's store. Now, a lot of people have owned the store, ran the store, worked in the store, and I just had to pick a name, so I'm going with Halla. So when I talk about this building, I'm talking about Halla's store, even though Giles did own it and run the store there at one time. So here we are, and we've got Halla's store here, and you can tell by the dormer and the perpendicular roof line, this is Halla's store. Well, directly across the road from Halla's store is this other building, which is where the bandstand gazebo is now. And this building was the store at that time. It was run by a man named LeBeau. And so I'm going to refer to this building as LeBeau's store, not Halla's store and not Giles's store. This is LeBeau's store. And this explains why when you're reading the deeds for the bandstand, it says being the store property. And at one time, Sam Lake owned this building. And Sam didn't really run a store, but he was a wheeler and dealer who bought and sold apples and lumber and logs and horses and grain and hay and tack and saddles and things like that. So it was kind of a store. He lived in the next building down where you pay your taxes, but he owned this building and he ran his livery stable business out of it and did sell things. So sometimes this is referred to as Sam Lake's store. Well, that's why you have a deed that says being the store property and bounded on the north by Sam Lake. And that tends to shift everything one block because your inclination is to say, this is the store and the Sam Lake property is where you pay your taxes. So now I understand why the deed for the bandstand seems whacked. LeBeau's store, looking at it again in a different photo, different perspective on it, this is still Halla's store. You can't see the dormer behind it, but it's still the Halla store. And LeBeau's store has got a different perspective on it. If we go back, it doesn't have the false wood front. See the false wood front, but you can see the pitch roof behind it. You know, out of the cowboy western, you put a false wood front on it. But what I want you to see here is that the post office was in LeBeau's store. And that becomes important because if you read a lot of the documents, they'll tell you that the fire started in the post office. Well, or in the store with the post office, or in the building with the store and the post office. Well, we're still not at the right building. but I wanted to get you organized. So we'll try and talk about this as LeBeau's store, and this is Halla's store. The next thing I want you to focus on in this picture is look way over on this edge, and you can just barely see it. But see, there's another building here. See the little bit of a peek and a little hint of the building here? Just a little bit of a hint of a building there? Well, that's the town hall. There's Halla's store, there's LeBeau's store, and there's the town hall. Now, the town hall was located about 4 feet away from Halla's store. So now when you do a property line, the property line is in here. That means that the store's leach field is on town hall property, even though they got an easement from the church to have a septic system on church property. It's actually on town hall property, which means that easement legally has no merit because you can't give an easement on land you don't own. So working the survey aspect of this, it's getting more and more complicated and more problematic and messier. But I like this picture for a number of reasons. The town hall has got a shed over here. Now this shed is a series of horse stalls. And that way, when you went to town to go to town meeting or go to church or grocery shopping, you had a place to park your horse. You can't just park it and take the keys. You had to have a place to put it. So you put it in a horse shed, and there was a long series of horse sheds that run a long distance back out here. Now, according to Catherine Dixon, this set of horse sheds is attached to the town hall. Some of the other people I spoke with are adamant that it wasn't attached to the town hall. Now, I don't know how important that is or isn't, but to some of the people I spoke with, there was quite the controversy about whether the horse sheds were attached or not. In this picture, clearly they aren't. There's a gap there. Now, maybe it was at one time, or maybe it was after this picture was taken, so I'm not going to call Catherine wrong, but to the sake that that's an important argument, there's picture proof that maybe it wasn't attached. Now, looking at this picture, there's a couple other things I want to highlight. One of them is these two gentlemen. Anybody recognize who them? I see Sumner and Kathy. Do you know who that is?
I think it's my grandfather.
I think you're right. Yeah, that's Leroy Glines. And the fellow behind Leroy Glines is David M. Clough. David M. Clough, he had the initials DMC, and people said, and he let them say it, that DMC actually stood for damn mean cuss. So rather than be known as David M. Clough, he was known as damn mean cuss. Now behind damn mean cuss, we've got a 2-story building which is appearing for the first time in these photos. See this 2-story building? Well, keep track of that. We're coming back to it. But now I want to spin the other direction. So if we spin the other direction, we still got Halla's store, we got LeBeau's store, and we've got this other building appearing kind of where the flagpole and Veterans Monument is. Now this building is actually a combination of 2 buildings. This end of the building is the church vestry. And that's where Sunday school classes were held. Anybody here go to Sunday school? Yeah, Kathy did. You went to Sunday school in that end of the building? Yeah. The other end of the building was a residence, and people lived there. Various people over the years moved in and out of there, or rented and lived there. That's why the property line for the flagpole is split down the middle, half belonging to the church and half belonging to a private residence. It was because we actually had a connected building that was half and half. If we continue to rotate in the direction that I've been going here, we come to this building. Now this building doesn't look much different, and in fact I took this picture not too long ago. If you remember what this looked like, say 15, 20 years ago, something like that, I'm standing kind of at the intersection of Kimball Pond and Baptist Road where they come together when I take this picture. And there used to be a sidewalk that ran from that intersection right up direct to the door. Remember that? Some do, some don't. Well, the sidewalk went away when a leach field was installed here. A septic system leach field was installed in the front lawn, and that changed the grade. So instead of a gradual slope down, the leach field required a level slope and a steep drop. So when the level slope and the steep drop went in, the sidewalk went away. Well, I want you to pretend the sidewalk is still there and go halfway up the sidewalk to the door and stop and do an about face. And if you do, this is what you're going to see. So you got this Civil War Veterans Monument, you've got the cemetery, you got the town hall, you got the church, you got the flagpole. There's another building down in here that you really can't see. I see Jeremy here, but today we're going to call it the Sabin-Girton House. A lot of people have been there and we got to pick a name, so I'm going to call it Sabin-Girton House. If you continue to spin a little further, you can see the house a little bit better here. And you can also see the bandstand, the flagpole, the Halla store, and way in the back you can see the Sam Lake House where you pay your taxes. If you saw it in the wintertime, the Sabin-Girton House sticks out better. The leaves are off the trees and it sticks out. And the reason I want to highlight that is because if you look in these old photos, now we're getting into what the town looked like before the fire, pre-fire. You can clearly pick out the Sabin-Girton House because of its unique roof line. And so see the unique roof line shape of the house? You can pick out the Sabin-Girton House. It hasn't changed much. It looks pretty much the same pre-fire as it did after the fire. But one of the things that looks really different is the church. Pre-fire, the church has 2 levels. After the fire, it's 1. Pre-fire, you've got a clock tower, an open bell tower, a lantern, and a weather vane. After the fire, you got a clock tower, a closed belfry, and a steeple. You got 1 door, you got 3 doors. So the church has changed quite a bit, even though it's basically in the same spot. I mean, it might be moved and shifted a little bit, but physically it's changed a lot. Looking at this photo, we pick out a few more things. Behind the church are those horse sheds. You can see them a little better, that may or may not be attached to the town hall, which is out of sight behind this building, which is the vestry where you had Sunday school classes. And there's another building coming into view now that we hadn't noticed before, and that's this one. So in between the church and the Sabin-Girton House, there's another building. And this building, if we get closer to it, looks like this. Now we're standing in the middle of Center Road, looking at that building. That building is where Gerald Giles had a store. So now we got another store with another post office, all within the center. So you got to be careful when you talk about the store with the post office in the center, which one you're actually talking about. This picture was taken before Gerald Giles owned the store. The people in this picture are the Alfred Brown, and he owned the store at that time. And Alfred Brown lived in the house where Ginny L'Italian's house is now. That's where he lived, and he's this fellow in the picture. The ground level of the store, the ground level here was the store and the post office. Behind it in the back and around, there was living quarters, an apartment, and that's where the Giles family was living. Upstairs above it, double doors would bring you up here to the 2nd floor. And the 2nd floor was a big open dance hall kind of place. Piano, kind of like what we're in here. Big open dance hall, and you set it up however you needed to. And the 3rd floor was kind of storage. The dance hall and the building is used by the Grange, and so sometimes this is referred to as the Grange Hall. Sometimes it's referred to as the Union Hall, kind of depends on who's writing and what we're talking about and what time period. So sometimes it's the Union Hall, sometimes it's the Grange Hall, sometimes it's Gerald Giles' store, sometimes it's the post office. But this is the building. Now if we keep moving around the center and trying to get a better view, you can see where the vestry is kind of split in 2 at different levels. You got one level here, the vestry, and then the upper level is the residential section. What I want you to look for, though, is this is the building we were just talking about, the Union Hall, Grange Hall. If you look through the porch, you can pick out another building. And this other building is kind of a low cape with a porch on the front. And that's actually a private residence. So we had a lot of buildings stacked up in a row going down Center Road here before you get to Sabin-Girton's house, which is still there. So you got quite a few going down the road here. I think I got it. Yeah, this one shows you where the town hall is. In between them, this gives you a better view of the town hall and the shed that may or may not be attached. This one we back off a little bit. We're still basically the same perspective, the same angle, but it gives you a better view of this building, which is vestry and residential. And you can tell that the maintenance, the owner, and the construction is a little different because half is residential, so they got newer shingles. In the church half, you got older shingles. And in other pictures, the painting job, they stop right down the line. Another thing I want to point out in this picture is we've got away from horse and buggy and we're into early automobiles. And so because we've got early automobiles, we've got gas pumps in front of the store. Now, if you remember the gas pumps from the early day, they stood up like 7 foot tall and they had a globe on the top that said SO or Flying A or something like that, and it was kind of neon kind of thing. And so these gas pumps are pretty big, and that's what we're looking at right here. This block here is the watering trough that's still there, but it's moved closer in so the snowplows don't hit it. And if you look down the line here, beyond the vestry and the residence, you can see going towards LeBeau's store, you can see Hala's store, and way in the back, you can see the Sam Lake House where you pay your taxes. So that kind of gets you oriented, and you can still see the shed in the back here that may or may not be attached to the town hall. So if we keep this perspective, we've rotated just a little bit, and I've done this for people that have a hard time with east and west. For me, it comes natural, but other people look at you like you got two heads when you tell them head east or head west. If you use this view, you got the cemetery on your left, and on your right, you got the vestry, the church, the Union Hall, this private residence, and then in here is the Sam Lake House. Saban-Girton, correct, thank you. Thank you, that was a bad mistake. That's the Saban-Girton house. Now if we go down the road and turn around 180 and look, now I would have said east, but you look the other way. Now you've got the cemetery on your right, and you're looking up the road. You've got the private residence here with the porch. Right here is the Union Hall with the porch, and right here is where the store and the post office would be. You've got the double level church, and you've got the vestry up here. So now we kind of got an idea of what the town looked like pre-fire. There's one other element we got to talk about pre-fire. Anybody recognize this guy? This is Albi Cass. Albi was road agent for a period of time here in town. This photo was taken probably late 60s, but in 1943, Albi Cass lived in this house, or lived across from the elementary school where this house is. I think of this as Robbie's wiring service. He ran an electrical business out of there, and his wife ran a jewelry trinket shop there for a lot of years. And so that's what I think of this house is, and that's where Albi Cass lived pre-fire. The building didn't look like that pre-fire. It looked like this. So you can see it changed quite a bit pre-fire to after fire. So now you know what the town looked like pre-fire. April 7th, 1943, the country was in the middle of World War II. All of the servicemen, or all the young men from Canterbury, or a lot of the young men from Canterbury had shipped out, made it hard to have a volunteer fire department. There weren't a lot of young rugged men hanging around. And at the same time, other men were either being drafted or volunteering, signing up to go, and the town had a custom, a tradition. This one was given to me by Harry Lamprey. They had a custom or tradition where they'd hold a goodbye party for the guy. I mean, getting emotional. When he shipped out, he didn't know if he was ever coming home again. And if he did come home again, it probably wasn't going to be for a couple of years. So the town would hold a little goodbye party. They'd have some music, some dancing. He'd get to kiss all the pretty girls. Maybe they'd spike the punch, give him some refreshments, some cookies. They'd pass the hat around. Everybody'd put a few dollars in it. And, you know, he'd take the money and he'd use it to whatever he needed to use it for while he was waiting to draw his military service pay. Pretty neat tradition, and the town had a habit of doing that. Now this one was Harry Lamprey's, and he shipped out on February 3rd, so this is not the night of the incident. But some of the people remember that there was a party on April 7th where they said goodbye to somebody who was departing. And it was a wicked cold night, and they built a fire in the wood stove in the Union Hall for the dancing and carousing and drinking and so forth. Catherine Dixon remembers it as a Grange meeting, and I guess it really doesn't make much difference. She remembers they were holding a Grange meeting in the Union Hall, and it was a wicked cold night, and so they built a fire and had the wood stove humming, and they were carousing and having a Grange meeting. Either way, at the end of the Grange meeting, or at the end of the party, somebody didn't do something right with the wood stove. They didn't shut it down properly, or maybe they shut it down and it backfired. I don't know. Perhaps it kicked out a spark, perhaps the chimney pipe came apart, perhaps it was a chimney fire. At any rate, it was a really cold night, and they had a party, and they built a fire in the wood stove, and something went out of control, and it started the building on fire in the second floor. Here's the chimney. The wood stove was up here, started a fire up here. Everybody had gone home. The Giles family was asleep in the apartment down here. The fire spread from the second floor up to the third floor. Things are burning, going good. The Giles family was awakened. Catherine Dixon says they were awakened when a piano on the second floor broke through the floor and came crashing down into their apartment and woke them up. This little fella here, or there's two fellas here. This fella here is Lenny Giles, the fellow with the rifle and the Elmer Fudd look. Obviously a few years in between the two. And this is his older brother. His name was also Gerald Giles, but they called him Duke or Dookie, so that they could distinguish him from his father. So Duke Giles and Lenny Giles. In this picture, they're probably 4 and 6, 5 and 7, 3, I don't know, a couple of years apart and pretty young. When the fire happened, they were in their early teens, maybe 14 and 16, 13 and 15, something like that. And they were asleep in the apartment. And Lenny remembers their father coming in and waking him up and saying, "Get dressed, put on warm clothes, and hurry up." Lenny says piano didn't come crashing down through the floor because if it had happened, he slept through it. He remembers his father coming in and waking him up. And he says there's no way he'd have slept through a burning floor piano crash coming down into the apartment. So he doesn't think Catherine Dixon's got that right, but he isn't ready to rule it out either. Maybe that woke up his father, and his father came and got him. He remembers getting dressed, and he remembers leaving the building, and he doesn't remember seeing a piano in the middle of anything. His father sends him next door to the Sabin Girton house, to sound the alarm. He sends Dookie, the older brother, down Old Tilton Road to the first house on the right, down Old Tilton Road, beyond the brick one-room schoolhouse. That's the house Catherine Dixon was living in at the time. And so the two brothers are banging on doors trying to wake people up to sound the alarm. And they do. And the father tells them, after you've sounded the alarm, get back here to the store. So they do. Catherine Dixon starts making phone calls trying to get help. Canterbury had no fire department, so there was nobody to call in Canterbury. She tries calling Concord and Boscawen and some of the other surrounding towns. Not having a lot of luck. She's getting the operators, but at that time there was no mutual aid established, and so the policy was the selectmen need to authorize the other towns to come to the fire and guarantee that they will get paid. And so they wouldn't dispatch the fire truck on Catherine Dixon's phone call. They needed a selectman to authorize it. So Catherine Dixon's now making phone calls to the selectmen. She calls Arthur Rogers. Can't get a hold of him. He's down at the railroad depot by exit 17. Can't get a hold of Arthur. She calls Arthur Brown up at Hill's Corner. Can't get a hold of him. She calls George Peverly out by Peverly Meadow. Can't get a hold of any of them. In part because it was a really cold night, and in those days you only had one telephone. It was kind of centrally located, like downstairs in the kitchen, and you're sleeping upstairs in the bedroom with the doors closed to conserve heat. So not having any luck getting a hold of people and dispatching fire. The town policy for fire at that time, I love this. This is great. if there was a fire, you drove around in your car or your truck or your vehicle, blowing the horn and flashing the lights. And that was the alarm. You drove around, and like if you knew somebody was home, drive in there, blow the horn, flash the lights. He comes out and says, "What's the matter?" And you say, "There's a fire at such and such." And then you go help fight the fire. And then you drive around and you blow the horn and you flash the lights until the word is sufficiently spread. Well, the fire's spreading faster than you're spreading the word. And they had no equipment. There was no fire department, so there's minimal equipment, buckets, and their bucket brigades and things like that. So the fire quickly overwhelmed this building. This is the store Union Hall building. It quickly overwhelmed it. Lenny Giles remembers after he spread the alarm getting back to the store and running into the building, and he and his father and his brothers and as more people showed up, they're doing kind of bucket brigades, getting stuff out. And he remembers grabbing canned goods off the shelves and throwing them out the window and grabbing whatever personal effects they could and bringing them out the window or passing them out the door until it got too dangerous, and then they bailed out. This is Lenny, a few years older. When the building burned down, they lost where they were living. But Gerald Giles owned the house where Rachel Baker lives now. And so the family wasn't exactly homeless. They were able to move to another home that Gerald Giles owned, which is where Rachel is. And when Lenny was in town talking with me, he wanted to go back and see that house. Like I said, he was probably 14, 15 when the fire started, and so he lived in Rachel's house for 3-4 years before he moved on as an adult. And he had pleasant memories of that house, so he wanted to go back and see it. So I contacted Rachel, and she was gracious enough to let us go poke around in her cupboards and cabinets and take some pictures. We found her liquor supply. Lenny knew where it was because it's where his parents kept the liquor supply. So we opened the door to see if they were still hiding it there, and they were. Yeah. So it was kind of a fun time for Lenny to go back and look at that. So, like I said, Lenny had been sent to the Sabin-Girton house to sound the alarm, and then he came back. This is the bell from the church. The fire quickly spread to buildings either side of the Union Hall, the private residence and the church. They were located relatively close to each other, and so the fire quickly spread to those two buildings, and they burned to the ground. Now, this is the Union Hall that we were just looking at from pretty much the same perspective. You're standing in Center Road and you're looking at Union Hall, only there's no building. You can see the gas pumps, but that's about it. Arising through the smoke, you can see what's left of the town hall. This would be the church that caught fire and burned. You can tell we're in the back now and we're looking across the church into the cemetery, and this is the Sabin-Girton barn. No longer there, but that's a good landmark. This is the church. This is the Union Hall where the fire started. You can't see it, but there's another foundation beyond it, and that's where the private residence was that burned. And that's why when you drive in here today, you're driving across private property to get here. It's because there was a private residence there. The next morning, you kind of look around, and I'm told that this is the bed that Lenny was sleeping in. And you've got foundations here where the residence, the Union Hall, or the church, the Union Hall were, or this, I guess this is the church. And this is the Union Hall. Peeking through the smoke, you can see the vestry building. And way back here, you know what that is? See that building back there? That's Lois Scribner's bed and breakfast. This is the town hall, and you can see it's badly scorched. A close-up view of it shows that it's really scorched in this area. And the story goes, Walter Hatch, the grave digger. Now there's some controversy here. Either he got on a snowplow and he pushed the sheds out of the building, or he got on a tractor with a chain and towed it out of the way. But at any rate, the horse stalls that may or may not have been attached to the building, the grave digger was there in the town center, and when the horse sheds caught fire, to save the town hall, he muckled onto the horse sheds with a piece of heavy equipment and dragged it away from the town hall, which saved the town hall. And it looks like it was pretty close by the scorch marks. It was pretty close to losing the town hall as well. If I look at that other picture, yeah. Used to be, I could say, this building back here, this is the garage behind the Sam Lake House where you pay your taxes. Used to be, that was like one of the only buildings that remained unchanged pre-fire to after fire, but recently we've changed that building around too, so now we can't say that's the only building that remained pre-fire, after fire. I'm going wrong. Here we go. Here, that's the one I want. This is the little brick one-room schoolhouse. And that survived the fire unscathed. So that's about the only building we have in the center that basically remained unchanged. And this is pretty close. You got a chimney here, which would have been for the private residence, and you can see it's all pretty close. Lenny Giles went to that one-room schoolhouse when he lived in the store, and he used to say, you know, it's kind of like the walk to school and the walk home was, you know, like, he didn't even have to wake up in the morning, you know, he'd kind of get dressed on the way to school and still be early.
Where are we standing now, taking that picture?
You're standing in Center Road, and you're looking through what would be probably the town hall today. Yeah. Oop, let's go the right way here. Okay, so this is the town hall where it stood at that time, and in the back here, this is Lois Scribner's barn and Lois's bed and breakfast, and this is the vestry building. And the reason I want to point out the bed and breakfast and the barn is they were unscathed by the fire, and they're pretty much unchanged today.
Mark, was that the view from your road, or?
I think that was from your drive, well, Saban's driveway. Yeah. See this turn here?
Yeah.
That's either Creamery Road or that's Saban's driveway, and I think it's the driveway. I wondered that myself. So this building's unscathed. This next building, as you work your way up Baptist Road, I would call this the Geiger House, but you could call it Clough, you could call it Morrill. There was a family named Quain that lived there, and there's quite a juicy story about scandal about them. If nobody here is recognizing the Quain, all right, someday we'll do another story here. This is now owned by the Booth family, so we'll call this the Booth House. But if you keep going up the road to where Albi Cass lived, I want you to recognize the three chimneys that kind of stick up like a tripod. Ouch. Yeah. Albi Cass was in the center fighting the fire, and somebody came down and said, Albi, you might want to go home, your house is on fire. And so he had to scoot up the hill, and sparks flew. It was a windy night, and embers and coals and sparks and whatever was flying in the
Where
wind.
exactly is this?
Right directly across the road from the elementary school, or the elementary school parking lot. Yeah, there's horses there now. Yeah.
You mean the fire skipped over?
The fire skipped the bed and breakfast, and it skipped the Booth house and came down here on Albi's house. Wow. Pretty neat, huh? Or not so neat, yeah. And if you look at the ruins of Albi's house, you can see the Booth house. At one time, there was I've forgotten the number, but there was an awful lot of buildings on fire all at the same time. In addition to the ones that we've already talked about, sparks landed on the roof of this one, and they had to scurry to put this one out. Now, this has got a slate roof and a brick building, so it's not like this one was quite the peril that some of the others were, but this building was also burning, or somewhat burning. This building used to be an L that connected the brick house to the barn. The L caught fire. And part of the discrepancy is some people say that's why the L isn't there anymore. It burned down beyond repair. Others say no, it survived and was torn down at a later date. And while everybody wants to fight and dicker about that, I can prove that that one was there after the fire, so that one I can say with certainty. Ralph Keeler had a workshop in there where he actually built some of the other stuff, the clock, the fire siren, things like that, and that was after the fire. So I'm quite certain people that say this burned down in the fire are remembering it incorrectly, but it did catch fire and was damaged. At the time, Sabin's brother, Jimmy Girton, was living here, and Jimmy Girton was in the center fighting the fire, and somebody said, "Jimmy, your house is on fire, you better go home." And so he had to beat feet down the hill and bucket water up onto the roof. This house, I would call this the Julie Brillhart house. Others may know it as, the Fred Chase or Wilburton. There's a number of names you could use for this one, but there seems to be some controversy over whether this one also caught some sparks and started burning or not. I think there's enough indication that it did. Catherine Dixon, in her book, kind of suggests it didn't, but others say that it did. Whatever fire it did catch wasn't significant enough. It saved the building. This one on Morrill Road, I would call this the Parker Place, Parker House. Some people would know it as Gale. I think Faith Berry owns it now. But this one caught fire and sustained some serious damage. Not so much that it was lost or ruined, but it took some serious repair to fix this one. And if you think about it, this one's quite a ways from the center, so the winds were traveling, the winds were blowing. And unrelated to the fire, is this a nice yellow? Faith stopped at my house one day and wanted a sample of the yellow on my barn so that she could use it as a sample to paint this house. And so they take it to Home Depot and they measure your samples, and so that yellow is modeled after my yellow barn. Our yellow barn. This house also caught fire. For the most part, the wind was blowing the opposite direction. You're going from the center north and east, and this one's kind of to the south and west. But sparks did get up onto the roof of this, and Sabin Girton went up on a ladder, a bucket of water, and put it out. And in the process of doing that, he sprained an ankle or injured himself, and that was the only injury in the fire. Yes, Susie?
Because it's so cold, where did they get the water from?
Yep. They tried to send a tanker truck from Boscawen, and of course at that time the bridge was open down by Brookford Farm, and so they were coming in from Boscawen across that bridge and around and into the center, and by the time they got here the water in the tank was frozen and they couldn't get it out. They sent a pumper truck down to Kimball Pond, and they were sucking water out of Kimball Pond, and the hoses froze up down there, so that didn't work too well. The fire pond at the Sam Lake House hadn't been dug, that didn't exist yet. So mostly they were pumping out of wells. There's a number of wells in the center and private wells, and they just hooked onto them, and they were doing what they could to get water there. For the most part, they could not put out the fire or anything like that. It's like those buildings are lost, they're gone, but they were trying to keep the fire from spreading to these other buildings, and that's what the water was for. So this building was damaged in the fire, and this building also had some fire damage. The next morning, there was nothing to do except stand around with your hands in your pockets and watch some guy with a pipe in his teeth chop down a telephone pole with an axe. Not much else you could do, right? And of course it drew a crowd. And now we're standing on that sidewalk up to the library that we were talking about originally, and we're looking into the center, and you can see it looks quite a bit different. The vestry building is still here, but other than that, you got the vestry building and you got the cemetery that you can use as landmarks, and maybe this elm tree. This elm tree is pretty prominent in a lot of the photos. I can recognize an elm tree in a photo. A lot of people can't, but that's a pretty prominent elm. And that's a pretty good landmark. So I put the two together so that you could kind of do a before and after, but I didn't have perfect photos for a before and after. This was the closest I could get that had the cemetery and the vestry in both photos. And you can see that we lost quite a bit of history, quite a bit of nice buildings, quite a bit of the center of town. So the next morning, we got to get busy, got to get to work. What are you going to do? Well, the first thing the town needed was a store. In 1943, in that time period, there were no other stores. You had to travel quite a distance to get to a store. Giles used to bring things in on the railroad and unload them at the railroad depots and bring them up to the store, and anything he needed, he ordered and shipped in railroad. So with the store gone, a lot of people in town were hurting. So what do? Well, Giles opened up a temporary store in the vestry. So now we've got another Giles store in another building in the town. Shortly after that, that was just a temporary thing, and a temporary post office in the vestry building. Shortly after that, they moved into the building that the store is in now, the Halla store. Giles moved in over there. And this is a picture of Gerald Giles. This is a salesman representative, and they're in a stock room in the back of that store. And these photos came to me from Lenny Giles, and the next few we get to play Guess Who That Guy Is? That's Dookie Giles, the older brother working in the store. Lenny's older brother, Dookie, working in the store. I was hoping there were some people I was hoping would show up today, but I don't see them here in the audience. Would have made it more fun to guess and recognize who these two people are. Anybody got a guess? Yeah. Well, this guy is Colin Heath, would be the father of David Heath, who works for the town. And Colin Heath was one of the lead carpenters in the volunteer effort to rebuild the church. The church got rebuilt with donations and volunteer labor and donated material and donated time. And Colin Heath was one of the carpenters that did it. So that's Colin. I was hoping David would be here to see if he recognized his father, but he didn't. This fellow, somebody's got to recognize him. Kathy, do you recognize him? When I say the name, you might. That's Harry Hook. Yeah. If half of the stories about Harry Hook are half true, we could do a program that lasts 6 hours and write a thick book. Harry Hook was a character. I don't know how else to describe it. I mean, they tried to hang him. He got in this fight over your barn, Sabin Girton's barn. They threw a rope up over the rafters and they were going to hang him from the rafters, and I don't know, stories just go on and on and on about Harry Hook. So I was hoping there'd be people here that kind of remembered or knew Harry Hook. And someday, man, I'm going to write a Harry Hook book.
I knew Harry. We sold eggs to him, and I delivered the eggs.
The little tar paper shack that he lived in down, yeah, and did it creep you out to go there? He was
He paid me every week.
Yeah, we could tell Harry Hook stories all day. This fellow is kind of a unique Canterbury character too, and once again there was another individual I was hoping would be here today, and I don't see her in the room. This is Jan Cody's father, Richard Rollins. So I was hoping Jan might be here when I put this photo in. So, Fire of 43 ends, and the town says, well, let's do something about it. And in 1944, they tried to organize a fire department. They figured, you know, maybe we should have a fire department so we don't do this again. Seems like a good idea. So they tried to get one organized and started. They had moderate success administratively, but in reality, World War II was still going on, and all of the men that were appropriate for being on a fire department weren't around. So it was 45 and 46 before the fire department really got rolling. And in 1946, they actually bought a brand spanking new fire truck so that they could fight fires. And the brand new fire truck was a 1922 leftover that Concord was getting rid of, but we're at least getting started and moving up in the world. 1947, the town hall got picked up and moved to where it is, to where we are today. It was still like 4 feet away from Halla's store over there, and they picked it up in 47, rolled it down the road and put it here. And the neat story that goes along with this is if you think about how the town hall was facing then and how it's facing today, you've got to do some twisting, turning, and rotating, and old buildings don't like to do a lot of turns. So what they did is they pulled it straight out from, say, Hallis Store, across the common, pulled it out into Center Road, and then turned it, and then backed it down the hill, backed it down Center Road, backed it in here, and backed it into place and parked it here. Pretty neat. Well, what makes the story neat is they couldn't get all that done in one day. So the first day they pulled it out into Center Road, left it there overnight. The next day rotated it and pushed it into place here today. They say they had like lanterns and road guards out there to slow traffic down overnight, but okay. So this is the building jacked up, being moved and rolled into place.
Is that the bell out of the church?
No, the bell out of the church was ruined and destroyed. The bell for the church is another great story that we should tell some other day. I see some smiling faces. Some people know the bell story. That's a great story for another time. After the town hall is put into place, they start focusing on the church. And we're talking this, the church, they started immediately fundraising and trying to get donations and so forth. And they did get started on it. The town hall's in place, we're building the church, and we're building the steeple. This is the vestry, and you can see how it's painted right to here, and the roof is right here. Pretty neat. Once the church is built, this is a great photo too. This is Sabin Girton's house. The town hall's in place. They're building the church. Giles has moved over into the store and he's installed the gas pumps that we pulled in one of the very first slides that I showed you. We were pulling the gas pumps. Well, they're new in this photo. And so we got gas pumps here. And Ralph Keeler's up here installing a clock on a bet or a dare. Another story for another day. This is the Old Home Day parade in 1955. And the Old Home Day event included a parade, and the Old Home Day event and the Canterbury Fair kind of merged, or they became one and the same, or one absorbed the other kind of thing. So if you think about the Canterbury Fair, it kind of started with this Old Home Day, and the Old Home Day had a parade. And I like this photo because it tells me in 1955 the vestry was still here. This is kind of where the flagpole is, and you can see the Civil War monument. Civil War monument today is across the road in the cemetery, but back then it was here. And it didn't move across the road until 1992. Linwood and some of us were involved in moving it. I'm thinking it was 92. But in 1955, this was the vestry and it was still there. Anybody recognize this young lady showing some leg and pulling his cart down the road in the parade? LMA Cochran? Okay, so now we're in that same time period. Anybody figure out where we are now with this photo? If you look through the building, you can see the church steeple, and to the right you can see the town hall that we're in now. And this building is now the meeting house, but at the time that was the fire department. They built a one-room fire department. It's the parish house. So this is like 1959 and we're building the parish house. This is the front of the parish house, same time period, and it's built on town hall property. Nobody bothered to change, property line's fluid and we're all in the center, it's convenient, well, let's just build what we need to build. So they built the parish house. This photo is 1960, and you can see the flagpole and the Civil War monument is still right at the flagpole, and it hasn't been moved across the road yet, but the vestry building's gone. So as soon as the parish house was built, you didn't need the vestry anymore, the vestry got taken down. What I like about this picture is you can see the Hallis store, with the funny dormer in the back and the perpendicular turn to it here in the front. So you can see the Halla store. But if you look close, you're looking right through the store at the parish house. Now, how do you do that? Trick photography, maybe? How do you look through the store at the parish house? Well, at one time, there was a hole in the store. The residence was on one side, the store was on the other side, and in between was kind of no man's land, and a different owner decided that maybe we could make use out of that space. And so they tore the center out of the store and started from scratch, rebuilt it, and if you go there today, the middle section is actually new, and that's kind of where the post office is, and the coolers and some of those things. So that's how come you can look through the store and see the parish house and the Sam Lake house in that other photo. And it makes sense in this photo, but in that other one, you're thinking something's going on. And we started with an aerial photo, so let's wrap up with an aerial photo. This building was built as the fire station, and they outgrew it. So they built this building as the fire station and turned this into the police station. They outgrew this as a fire station, so they built a new fire station back here and converted this into the highway garage. Then we outgrew this, so we moved up the hill, up the road, and converted this into the library. And you can still see the brick one-room schoolhouse that hung on to everything here. And one of the very last things to get built in the town center, whoops, I put this in because I wanted you to know that we did actually get the survey done. Talk about mental gymnastics, brain teaser. After a while, we kind of gave up and said, why don't we just start with a blank sheet of paper and we'll put the property lines where they make sense. And so we did that, and we did boundary line agreements, and we exchanged quitclaim deeds, and all of the parties signed off. And this way, the town hall ends up on town hall property, and the parish house ends up on church property, and not vice versa. So rather than resurrect the old property lines, we just kind of squared off and started from ground zero. This was one of the last buildings to get built, last buildings to get put up, and it was done by volunteers and donated labor and donated material. And I want you to guess who this little girl is right here. It's passing out shingles. That's all I got. We can do questions, comments, or if we're over time, I don't know how we're doing for time. If we need to leave, or if you need to go home and watch the Patriots, you can scoot.
How many buildings in total were burned?
Yeah, kind of depends on how you want to count it. Certainly there were 3 that were total loss: the church, the union hall, and the private residence. Those are total losses. They're completely gone. If you count the horse shed as a building, that's a total loss. I don't know if I'd count that as a building or not, but that was total loss, total gone. And then if you count Albi Cass's house, that one was a total loss and gone. And then there's a number of others that were damaged, kind of thing, as well as wood sheds and outhouses and things like that went to. Yeah, Jeremy?
I think you said that the vestry, they removed it like post-1955 or something, or else what it was. But that was also, you said, a private residence.
Yeah.
So do you know anything about how they resolved moving the vestry and the residence at the same time? Or?
I know that when we did the boundary line adjustment work in the 1990s, we got sign-off from all of the parties involved. At that point, the town had laid claim to that. I mean, it was part of the town common, and it was perceived as town property. My hunch is, once the residence was gone, the town acquired it. I never found good title for it, though.
But the residents survived the fire.
The residents survived the fire, yes. Yep. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Insurance, was there such a thing?
If there was, I'm unaware of who collected what and got what out of it. I can tell you Albi Cass lost everything, and they passed the hat to give him some money to get him started, and he moved in with his brother who lives up by John Gogol, up in that end of town. The Giles family didn't have a lot of insurance either, because Giles was the kind of guy who kept his money, you know, under his bed. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Harry?
Do you have like a year the gap was closed in the store, or who the owner was? Was it Carl here?
It was Peterson, yeah. I know the year, but I couldn't tell you now, but it was during Peterson's ownership, yeah. Yeah.
I'm told there was a story, I don't know, you may remember Andy Fowler?
Yep.
And Becky Fowler. Well, I'm told that they wanted to buy the vestry and move it for a house down the road, a lot they had. And they went to move it and it kind of fell apart.
The version I heard was they were interested in buying it, but there was nothing worth saving. Yeah. And it could be that it fell apart when they tried, but yeah, I heard that they wanted to buy, or them and some other people were interested in salvaging whatever was salvageable, and when they started digging into it, it was like, yeah, we don't want this, thanks. Yeah,
Would you point to the wall of this building that got scorched?
That would be right there. Who said no?
It's gotta be on that side, isn't it? The front of the building's turned over here.
Yeah, it would be this
Yeah, yeah.
east-west.
East-west, yeah. This would have been the front door either way, and it would have been this side, yeah. So it would have been over here. Yeah, you could be right. Miss Krautman.
How long did it take for them to rebuild like all the buildings?
Well, they started right away, so like right after the fire in 1943, they started raising money and making plans and trying to find funds and donations and figuring out where they wanted to put things. So if you count it starting in 43, the bandstand didn't get finished until 84. So if you want to count it from 43 to 84, you can do that. There's a lot of years in between where I guess you could say that was the end if you don't count the bandstand, or if you don't count starting in 43 and you wait till like 47. So
When was the church completed?
49. Yeah, Tom?
Did anything from the church get saved at?
Very little. Unlike the Worcester Church, where they were running inside in the Worcester Church and they grabbed everything, yeah. No.
Didn't you say that some of the lumber come off the Kimball's down there?
Yep. A lot of the church was built with donated lumber, and at that time there were a lot of people in town that were in the lumbering business. Right after the hurricane of 38, everybody went into the logging business, and there was a lot of hurricane lumber, wide boards and that kind of thing, and a lot of people had portable sawmills, and a lot of people had draft horses or oxen, and Kimball donated a lot of nice wide pine boards that were used in the pews in the church over there, and then he got ticked off because the volunteers painted it. Nice wide boards, no knots, no cracks, no nothing, and he donated it, and they worked hard shaping up and making nice, beautiful pews. And he was thinking they were going to finish them, with a nice natural finish, and volunteers went in and whitewashed it. Peter.
Was the bell in the picture the one at the meeting house? Oh, no.
Don't think so. No. The one at the meeting house came from...
Came from Sam Lakes, I think, it was up there originally.
Yeah, but I don't know where it came from before that.
That's a good question.
The bell in the church came from Suncook, and there's a lot of nefarious activity to get it from Suncook up into the tower in the church now, and I don't believe that's the bell. Could be, but I don't believe it. Don't know, Peter. Good question.
Figure that out.
Yeah. Jeremy.
One last one. I don't know if it's apocryphal or heard it from Catherine's book, but somewhere during the time I owned the house here in the center, I was told that there was a electrical utility pole out here at 43, and that because of the lack of ability to get fire trucks and water, that the electric pumps for the well water was critical, and that one or two people that were available were dedicated to keeping the telephone pole from burning so that it wouldn't take up the lines. Is that something that came across, or is that in the book?
Yes, but I heard a variation on that. The variation I heard is that the Dixon family that was living there in your house, or your former house, they were raising chickens, and they had a bunch of pullets, like 5,000 of them. They had a lot of them.
Upstairs, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And they needed to be kept warm. They had electric light, electric radiant heat, electric red light heat on them. And if they lost power, they were going to lose all those chickens. And so they called the power company and said, what do we got to do to keep this power turned on so that we don't lose these chickens? And they said, well, as long as you can keep that pole from catching fire, we'll keep the power turned on. And so in part it was to provide electricity for pumps, but in part there was a hidden motive there to keep the pullets alive, keep the chickens alive. One of those things where there's one version and then there's another version. Yeah, Paul.
It was bare ground at the time when the fire happened?
It was April.
There's so many of those pictures that have snow on the ground.
Yeah, yeah.
And the steam and smoke rising, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. A lot of those photos that have snow in them are because I had to use what's available, and unfortunately there was nobody there documenting pre-fire, during fire, and after fire, so I was looking for old photos that I could link and put together.
The pictures of the next day look like it's bare ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that could have been from the heat.
Yeah, and it was April 7th, so you got flaky weather going on there anyway. It could have been, I don't know whether there was bare ground snow. Yeah. Yeah, Ken?
When we rebuilt the center in 2005, I spent a lot of time with Robbie up on top of the hill negotiating on where the municipal complex is now. And he told me this story that they needed a siren, so they found a civil defense unit somewhere. And he and Bob Lee and Ralph Keeler were putting this thing together in that shed between the barn and the house. That's how he described it.
Yep, the basement of that building.
The basement of it.
Yes.
They got the whole thing assembled and they decided they really ought to hear what it sounded like. Well, when you twist that thing up, it's done hydraulically, so it's actually spinning this heavy cylinder and then it's making the noise. And it just got louder and louder, and Robbie told me he couldn't keep food down for a week after that.
I'd heard that too. It works on centrifugal force.
Yes.
So once it gets going, you can't just shut it off. And they were in a trapped little environment there, and yeah.
It's still all behind the meeting house to this day.
I did test pits, perk tests up there for Robbie. Before the town was doing it, he was looking at it and doing some other things up there. And so we're digging holes in the ground trying to do test pits and perk tests, and we're finding all this charred, burnt iron, brick, rocks, that kind of thing. And I did some for the church at one point too, and we were finding the same thing. You try to dig a test hole to get, it was like there's just garbage and crap and soot, and didn't work too well for either of those. Yeah.
Same thing happened out here on the flat area where the leach field is now. When we dug that up, there was all kinds of stuff that would burn coming up out of the hole.
Yeah, I did that one too.
Yeah.
That one we were able to make work, but yeah. Briggs.
Do you know who the contractor was that moved this building over?
I do. If I could remember it, I would. Say it again?
Was it Hill?
Yes, yes, that's who it was, yes. Yep.
They would have moved to the church from the other side of town too.
The Baptist church that went to Northfield? Yeah.
I think it was that.
Yep. Well.
Wow, thank you. I know you'll join me and the staff in giving Mark a great round of applause.